There's a lot of information out there on maximizing KOL interactions in a virtual environment. In a recent video, we discussed the big picture takeaway for virtual interactions. But how do you actually make this happen? In this video, we're discussing tactics that MSLs can execute today to make the most of the time they have with KOLs. And newsflash, that time is decreasing.
Here's our new reality. Virtual engagements are changing the MSL to KOL relationship. A recent MSL Society webinar quoted that the average time a KOL spends in a virtual engagement is 16 to 30 minutes. Contrast this with face-to-face meetings prior to the pandemic, which averaged around 45 minutes. This, in conjunction with data that says the number of KOL meetings are decreasing, leaves an MSL much less opportunity to make a difference. So what do? In this discussion, we wanted to leave you with some actionable insights you can use to maximize the time you have with your KOL. Here's the fine print. Any tactics you employ in the field should still follow your organization's field engagement guidelines. I am joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Leslie Vollenweider and Dr. Maria Margolis, both MSL field directors at TMAC. Thanks for joining me in this discussion.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks, Sonia.
So let's jump right into it. We're talking about how to add value to virtual engagements in a shorter period of time. So what we're seeing is that a lot of MSL meetings are now very agenda driven. So how does an MSL harness this change to their advantage?
Yeah, I think in this situation, it's really not a new thing, but it becomes very important for your pre-call planning. And that's very paramount. You have to research the topics of interest, find out as much as you can about your KOL ahead of time, make sure that you know what they really want to know. And you really have to zero in on that on your agenda. You'll have to come up with your top 2 points that you want to make and really have a lot more focus than you might have had in the past. I think relying on your visual cues when you would have gone into the person's office and seen their diplomas or their hobbies or their family pictures and being able to use that in the conversation, it's not going to be as available to you in a virtual setting. You still may have to research ahead of time where they went to school or whether or not they have interests in football so you can make that conversation. But those visual cues aren't going to be there in a virtual meeting very, very much. Leslie, what do you think?
I couldn't agree more, Maria. I really think the visual cues are very important because they might be very subtle along the way. And that really makes you have to really practice your self-awareness. I know when we're face-to-face with someone, we're a little more conscientious around, how we're sitting, how we're looking at them, are we slouching, those types of things. All of that remains very important in a virtual world as well, although it might not be quite as easy to do. And with regard to sharing an agenda, you've put it together, you've done your homework. It would be a great opportunity to share that with the KOL if you have that chance to do it. One thing that might do for you is to buy you a little more time because they realize that you're coming with some particular points that you feel are very important that you want to share with them, perhaps get their feedback on as well. So I think that's really a key point, Maria, is to do that preparation and have that agenda ready to share. There may be questions from time to time about how robust of an agenda you might want to share. You probably want to just stick to your major topics, and that way someone who might see more than one line per topic won't be a little concerned that this is going to take longer than they were anticipated, but seriously, it would just be something that's short and sweet to discuss. So I think that's really important as well, as to make sure it's your top 1, 2, or 3 components that you want to really share with them.
And you could really still build an icebreaker into your agenda as well. But I think, again, being aware of your KOL and their interests, it's important to really zero in on that. I mean, there's going to be some people who are willing to have that breezy conversation ahead of time. Other people are going to want to get right to the point. So, your agenda should be what focuses the conversation in that virtual meeting.
Absolutely.
And I think knowing your KOL, that goes a long way in that as well, Maria, because you have to know if they're the type of person who wants to have a little bit of chit chat icebreaker, or if they are busy and they just want to get to the point and keep it moving on their day. So I think that is really important as well.
Exactly, as well as respecting their time. I mean,
Absolutely.
as you were saying, Sonia, you usually only get about 15 minutes, and you don't want to waste any precious minutes on that. And make sure that you set the agenda ahead of time, saying, "I know, doctor, that we only have 15 minutes, so let's talk," and really be aware of that much more so than you would have in a face-to-face setting, perhaps.
Yep, I think that's a really great point that you made. What about maximizing these platforms? So, how can we maybe add visual, add audio interest, really maximize the fact that we're in a video platform versus obviously being face to face?
I honestly think it's a great opportunity for us to share our data, our diagrams, our slides. For many of you, you get into an office with a KOL and you want to share something with them, and you break out the iPad or the laptop, and you can see their eyes kind of get a little blurry going, oh no, here we go. There's going to be a lot of things to see. Well, they're kind of captured when you're on video. You've already got it keyed up behind the screens, and all you have to do is click the button. So I think that it makes it more robust. It always does, whether it's a live visit or a video visit, but certainly to have it keyed up and be able to swap between screens, to go from a website to back to your slide deck to make a point, to share a document or components of a document. I think that I think it's almost like a circus in a way. You have so many things. I think the issue might become, when do we stop? If we stop, then maybe that's one of their best ways of learning and listening to what you have to say, is to show them things. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, Leslie. And I think, again, building in some of that conversation is also important. The MSL has to know when to pause from the slide deck or the text, and you don't want to just have a wall of text. You want to build in some discussion questions where you would really engage the KOL rather than just showing them the information.
Absolutely. And a lot of the platforms have a variety of ways to do that. The whiteboarding system has really been used a lot. The polling, especially if you've got more than a couple of folks in a room, if they happen to be in their office and they say, hey, ask someone else to come in and join them, you can ask them to poll. There's a lot of variety of options on the platforms that we use that I think are really very engaging for the conversation.
That's a really great point, Leslie, and actually dovetails nicely into our next item that we wanted to discuss, but that's group meetings. So again, another advantage of the virtual platforms is being able to invite multiple KOLs to a meeting, which was always a little bit hard logistically before. So let's talk about some of the creativity with the group meetings.
I've seen it done where one MSL team or an MSL on a team, they have as part of their scientific platform to say, if we have new KOLs who are learning our therapeutic area, our product, whatever it might be, but we have some experts that we rely on, would we be able to connect those people and have a discussion between the two of them if they were amenable to it? And I've seen that happen in the past with regard to, connecting a KOL who's been working with a company and can answer more specific questions with someone who has questions that they'd like to really ask of another provider that actually practices in that area. A second way to do it that I've seen done very successfully recently is the virtual advisory boards. And I think logistically that has become, if not yet, it may become a gold standard, because it just seems that folks are more amenable to participating because they don't have long travel, being away from families, from practice. It ties up their weekends, those kinds of things. The three that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of have been very successful and have utilized things like the breakout rooms, as well as whiteboards and the polling functions in some of the platforms as well. So I think that that's a couple of ways. I think that this is really, in terms of group meetings, very useful.
Yeah, and I think you can also get colleagues together who may not have seen each other very recently. And again, that speaks to your pre-call planning and knowing which KOLs work with each other and maybe distant in distant cities, and you can really get them involved with each other, whereas that might not have been happening as readily in the past.
I think that's perfect. We had an example of that as well, where there was a specific therapeutic area where some of the physician KOLs we were calling on actually trained under some others that are now chiefs of departments and other places, and put them together in a room because they are people they really look up to. And it was very satisfying to see. And we did it attached to a virtual meeting for that therapeutic area. So while they were having their national meeting, we were able to squeeze in and have this virtual meeting among these alumni and their former professors.
That's really great, Leslie. I know in my history in infectious disease, we used to have meetings called citywides, where we would get individuals from all of the area hospitals together that were concerned with antimicrobial resistance in the region and be able to discuss. And so in these virtual environments, getting a citywide together is so much easier than it was in a face-to-face situation. So it's great to have the technology and to lean on that in these particular environments. So let's talk about the other side of this, when technology fails. So one of my favorite sayings of all time is luck favors the prepared. And I think that is from our friend Louis Pasteur, but it is something that we've got to talk about. So whether it's the technology completely failing or having to coach a less tech savvy KOL through multiple platforms, what do you guys think about when technology fails and how should an MSL handle that?
I think the key to that is to remain calm, is that each MSL, first of all, has to be very familiar with their own technology and how to use it, but also to be flexible and to have the ability to pivot if something's going wrong. And you have to, because there are so many technology platforms, we've spoken about Zoom and MS Teams, and there's other platforms as well, make sure that your KOL is aware of what platform you're using, that they're comfortable with it, that they have the capabilities to connect to it, and then be able to say, well, this isn't working, because your time is so critical on that short meeting that within a few minutes, if you realize the technology is failing, you got to be able to pivot to a phone call or something more low tech. Leslie, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. As Sonia mentioned earlier, while our potential amount of time that we have with our KOLs may be expanding with regard to this type of a format, we don't want to waste our 10 to 15 minutes trying to diagnose things that I certainly am not an expert in when it comes to the IT platforms. But if there is an issue, and we can never know what it is, that it is extremely important to take a look and say how much of our valuable time to have a discussion is being wasted by trying to figure it out, when we could pivot, like Maria suggested, to good old just a communication on verbal communication. And if you can stay on the platform and still use any type of visuals that you can, that's great. But if you can't get cameras to work, things like that you really can't control without wasting a lot of time, then I'd certainly agree that we would rather err on the side of having more time to talk as opposed to being able to share on the platform.
Yeah, and that actually makes it important to send your agenda ahead of time. So you make sure that they have received that. And if we do have to go back to a phone call, and if you're able to, if your company permits, sending your slides or your article ahead of time as well, so that they have that in front of them in case you have to go low tech.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you guys would agree with making sure that the KOL has your cell phone number in case of a technology failure.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ladies, so much for joining me today. We hope these tactics are going to benefit our audience. And if you are an MSL that has done something that has been out of the box and super successful in this virtual environment, we'd love to hear it in the comments. Thank you so much, Maria and Leslie.
You're welcome.